I have this little remote that I lost about 3 years ago. It was a tiny one, really big. And it was quite small, and I used it. It was attached to my laptop computer, and I used it to control the video features of my laptop. Now, if I wanted to, I could attach my computer to my television set and sit on my couch, and with my little remote control, I could look at pictures, home videos, or movies streamed from the internet from my computer into my television set, and I could sit on my couch and control that, just like a DVD player. Then I lost it. And I looked everywhere for it. I took up all the pillows from my couch. I took all the cushions off my couch. I looked under the couch. I looked in Gus. He was probably around 2 at the time. I looked in his toy bins because I said he's likely the one to have taken it and thrown it who knows where. And I could not find it. Now I was a little discouraged as now I had to get up off the couch and walk over to the computer and use the mouse to pause, stop, or fast forward my computer when I hooked it up to the television set. It was like days of old when people had to get up and go to the TV to turn the dial. Do you remember those days? Some of you? Now last week I moved some couches, some of our couches with Ken Weidinger in a feeble attempt to have a yard sale. In the morning we moved the couch from the garage to the driveway, just last week. Now a few people came by to look at it, but no one wanted to buy it. In the late afternoon the yard sale was over, so I called Ken and he came over again. And we moved the couches back into the garage. And that is when I noticed a small electronic device on the driveway where the couch had once been. It was my old computer remote. I rejoiced, and I told Ken the incredibly true story of how I had lost my remote control, and now I had found it. As you can imagine, Ken was underwhelmed. Now, I'm sure that all of you can share a similar story of this nature. Most of you can probably picture something that you have lost that later you had found. Now, my little remote control had little to no meaning. Let's be fair, it had no meaning for me other than aiding in my TV watching habits. It was not that important, nor was it sentimental or of any value, and I could have easily bought a replacement online if I had cared enough to do so. But I was happy when I had found it. I rejoiced about something that had once been lost and now was found. Now this is the theme for today, lost and found. It is what Jesus is talking about in the passage from Luke. Now at the beginning of the chapter, tax collectors and other sinners were gathering around to hear Jesus speak. And the Pharisees and the teachers of the law, they complained. Now remember, 2,000 years ago, in the time of Jesus, the Pharisees and the teachers of the law thought of themselves as better than, as holier than average people. They looked down upon tax collectors because they collaborated with the Roman Empire. They saw tax collectors as sinners. The Pharisees and the teachers of the law, they criticized Jesus. Said, Jesus, why do you welcome and eat with sinners and tax collectors? Instead of answering directly, Jesus, in his way, tells a parable. He tells 3, actually. Remember, a parable is a story that may or may not be true, that illustrates a point. So in the first one, Jesus tells the story of the lost sheep. And it begins with a hypothetical question. Now remember, he's talking to teachers and Pharisees in a society that was used to seeing sheep. And he asks this question. Suppose you had 100 sheep and you lose one. Would you not leave the other 99 in the open country and go out to the lost sheep until you have found it? And after you have found it, would you not put it on your shoulders, carry it home, call your friends and neighbors together and say to them, "Rejoice with me, I have found my lost sheep." Jesus ends the parable by saying, in the same way, there will be more rejoicing in heaven over one sinner who repents than over 99 righteous persons who do not need to repent. Now, Jesus is using this parable, this story, to describe the nature of God to the Pharisees and to the teachers of the law. Jesus is saying that God is a relentless pursuer of what, or rather, who is lost. Now, in the parable, Jesus, he does not cast blame or judgment on the sheep. Think for a moment. It is clear, however, that he is comparing a tax collector or a sinner to sheep. Now, Jesus does not say that the lost sheep was stupid, or that the lost sheep was bad, or that the lost sheep deserved to be lost. Jesus only states that the shepherd pursued the sheep until it was found. Now, Jesus does not describe the shepherd as mad, or as angry, or as annoyed. Jesus does not describe the shepherd as wavering, or as judgmental, or as half-hearted. Jesus describes the shepherd in the parable who is relentless, who does not give up, who is laser focused on his goal of finding his sheep. And when he does, Jesus describes the shepherd who is so joyful he picks the sheep up, puts it on his shoulders, and carries it home. He is so excited that he calls together his friends and his neighbors, and he asks them to party. The shepherd wants to rejoice. He wants to celebrate. Jesus is describing our God as this shepherd. Now, all of us can relate to the story. We have all been lost at one time or another in our life. Maybe we have been lost to despair, to the bottle, to consumerism, to addiction, to apathy, or to something else. Know this. Jesus paints a picture of a shepherd who will never stop looking for us. No matter what we think we have done, no matter how bad we think we are, no matter what kind of sins we have committed, our God is unyielding in pursuit of us. Our God is unyielding in pursuit of us. Now, the second parable that Jesus tells is in similar vein to the first one. Jesus describes a woman who has 10 silver coins and loses one. Jesus asks his audience, the tax collectors and sinners, and the Pharisees and teachers of the law, does she not light a lamp, sweep the house, and search carefully until she finds it? And when she finds it, she calls her friends and her neighbors together and says, "Rejoice with me, I have found my lost coin." Jesus ends the parable saying, "I tell you, there is rejoicing in the presence of angels of God over one sinner who repents." Yes, our God not only pursues us, but rejoices when what was lost is now found. Today we will be singing Amazing Grace, a familiar song to all of you, I'm sure. It was written by John Newton, who was an Anglican priest in England. He wrote the song in 1772, 4 years before our independence. And it was used for the first time on New Year's Day of 1773. Now, John Newton had made a remarkable 180 from the man that he had been in his earlier days. He was raised in a largely non-religious household. As a young adult, he became a sailor. And he was eventually pressed into service in the British Navy. Now, in a sailing culture used to vulgarity, John stood out for his profanity and was admonished more than a few times for exceeding its limits. I was telling the choir that John Newton was not the sort of man you wanted your daughter to meet. He also made fun of faith and at times directly opposed it, mocking others who showed theirs, deriding and denouncing God as a myth. Now, John was also involved in trading slaves, and in his practices participated in things that are unspeakable from this pulpit. One night, while aboard a ship, a violent storm took place. As the ship was filling with water, John cried out to God. Thus began his slow conversion to Christianity. Shortly thereafter, he started reading the Bible and other religious literature, and he tried to avoid profanity, gambling, and drinking. But he still traded in slaves. About 6 years after his near sinking of his ship, he gave up slave trading, and sailing, and embarked upon the process of becoming an Anglican priest. In 1788, 34 years after he retired from the slave trade, Newton broke a long silence on the subject of slavery with the publication of a forceful pamphlet entitled Thoughts Upon the Slave Trade, in which he described the horrific conditions of the slave ships during the Middle Passage, and apologized, quote, for a confession which comes too late. It will always be a subject of humiliating reflection to me that I was once an active instrument in a business at which my heart now shudders. John Newton, he did some bad stuff. Trading in humans is bad stuff. In his own words, he said this: "How industrious Satan served! I was formerly one of his active under-tempters, and had my influence been equal to my wishes, I would have carried all of the human race with me. A common drunkard is a petty sinner to what I once was." The song Amazing Grace that John wrote later in life is a story of someone who was truly lost and then found by a relentless God who pursues people like John Newton, a former slave trader with an unyielding passion. John Newton later became an ally of his friend William Wilberforce, leader of the parliamentary campaign to abolish the slave trade. John Newton lived to see the passage of the Slave Trade Act of 1807, which abolished slavery throughout the British Empire. What a turnaround. What a story about a man who was truly a lost sheep. But because our God is relentless in pursuing the lost, John Newton, he is not known as John the slave trader, but John, a redeemed person, an Anglican priest, a husband, a father, an abolitionist, and the writer of Amazing Grace. The song Amazing Grace is a true testimony to God's relentless passion in pursuing the lost and the incredible joy that comes when what or who is found. When you sing the hymn later in the service, I invite you to reflect on your own lives, to recall the times when you were once lost. I invite you to reflect on God's grace so amazing that even a slave trading person, a tax collector, a sinner, or someone like you or me is ultimately worthy in God's eyes of such unyielding passion. As the church, as people of God, as a people forgiven, as a people found, we are called by God to be like the shepherd in the parable. We have been given a job to pursue the lost with an unyielding, relentless passion. We have been given a mission to search until those who are lost have been found. We have been given a job description. It describes it right there in the parable. It looks something like this. We search for the lost. We do not get angry or judgmental. We do not pursue half-heartedly. We search with all that we've got. When we have found lost sheep, we pick him or her up. We carry them home. We then rejoice. We celebrate. We party. Because we too know what it's like to be that lost sheep. All of us have been lost sheep. We too know what